Hey everybody, it's Ron, and I want to tell you a story about business and how that story changed everything. High above the clouds, a lone pilot leans forward into the wind as his little biplane rattles through the sky. The scarf around his neck snaps back behind him while the engine buzzes and sputters, and somewhere out there in the clouds waits the one enemy every pilot fears. This time, he's flying it alone. No squadron beside him, no ground crew cheering him on, not even his tiny little yellow companion named Woodstock riding along for the mission. Because today, Snoopy has taken to the sky by himself, sitting on top of his doghouse as if it were a World War I fighter plane, searching the horizon for the legendary pilot he's battled 100 times before. The Red Baron. Snoopy banks hard to the left, scanning the clouds above him because everyone knows the story, understands the danger. Somewhere up there is a bright red biplane flown by the most feared ace in the war, a pilot whose reputation travels faster than the aircraft itself. If that red plane suddenly appears beside you in the sky, the fight is probably already over. The little dog fighter twists and dives through imaginary crowds while machine guns chatter and Snoopy narrates the whole battle in his own head, locked in another dogfight with a mysterious enemy he can never quite defeat. And then the picture begins to pull back. Two boys are sitting cross-legged on the living room floor watching an old Peanuts cartoon play out on the television. They lean forward as Snoopy dives through the sky, completely absorbed in the battle, narrating the action out loud the way the kids always do when a story grabs hold of their imagination. In the kitchen, their mother finishes cutting up a frozen pizza and carries the slices into the room before gently gathering the empty box on her counter and throwing it away. When she drops it into the trash, she pauses for just a moment and smiles. The name on the box had been familiar. It was a Red Baron pizza. A cartoon dog chasing a legendary pilot through the clouds, a frozen pizza brand borrowing the same name, a century-old aviation story still echoing in a suburban living room, all of it built around the same figure, the Red Baron. But how did a German fighter pilot from the First World War become a cultural symbol that shows up in cartoons, food brands, and popular imagination generations later? Who decided to turn a combat pilot into a celebrity in the first place? And when did governments realize that a single heroic story could become one of the most powerful tools of modern propaganda? To answer all of that, we have to go back to the skies over France and the final flight of the man who inspired the legend. And that happened on April 21st, 1918. From Business Basics, I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the daily podcast where we explain the stories that changed business forever. Every date on the calendar has a story where business reshaped the world. Today, April 21st, that story takes us to 1918, when a pilot became a brand. In the early years of the First World War, airplanes were still a brand new technology, and no one was entirely sure what their role in combat would become. At first, they were used mostly for observation. Pilots flew fragile aircraft made of wood and fabric high above the trenches, watching enemy troop movements and reporting back to commanders on the ground. These early planes were slow, lightly armed, and often flown by men who were still learning how to control them. But as the war dragged on, something unexpected began to happen in the skies over Europe. Pilots started hunting each other. The moment machine guns were synchronized to fire through the spinning propellers, the airplane changed from a scouting tool into a weapon. Suddenly the sky became another battlefield, and the pilots who could outmaneuver their opponents began to rack up victories the way soldiers on the ground never could. Those victories were pretty easy to count. Enemy aircraft that had been shot down could be confirmed and recorded, which meant a new kind of wartime statistic started appearing in military reports and newspaper headlines. Pilots with multiple victories were labeled aces, and before long their names began appearing in newspapers across Europe. Among the German pilots flying over the Western Front, one young aristocrat quickly rose to the top of that list. Manfred von Richthofen had joined the German Air Service after beginning the war in the cavalry, and he proved to have a remarkable instinct for aerial combat. Richthofen studied his opponents carefully, learned how to position himself above the enemy aircraft before attacking, and kept meticulous track of every victory he achieved. But what truly made him stand out was something really much simpler. He painted his airplane bright red. In a sky filled with camouflaged aircraft trying to hide from one another, Richthofen's fighter became instantly recognizable. Allied pilots could spot the aircraft from a distance, and newspapers quickly picked up the story of the German ace flying the Crimson Plane. Before long, the name began appearing in headlines across Europe, the Red Baron. And once that name took hold, the story of Manfred von Richthofen stopped being just a military record. It became something entirely different.
When I smoke weed, I get lost in the music. I like to isolate each instrument. The rhythmic bass, the harmonies on the piano, the sticky melody.
Hey, careful, babe. There's someone crossing the street.
Sorry, I didn't see him there.
If you feel different, you drive different. Don't drive high. It's dangerous and illegal everywhere. A message from NHTSA and the Ad Council.
By the middle of the war, the skies over Europe had become one of the few places where the conflict could produce something that looked like a clear, dramatic story. Down in the trenches, the fighting was slow, brutal, and it was often confusing. Battles stretched for months with gains measured in yards, and the casualty numbers were almost impossible for civilians to comprehend. But the air war was different. When a pilot shot down an enemy aircraft, the victory could be counted. Newspapers could report it clearly, and the public could follow the careers of individual pilots the same way sports fans followed athletes. And in 1917, the public got most of its war news from one place: a daily newspaper. There weren't any radio broadcasts bringing updates into homes every evening. Television was still decades away. If civilians wanted to understand what was happening on the fronts of World War I, they read the morning and evening papers, and those papers were locked in constant competition for readers. Editors knew that numbers and maps didn't sell nearly as well as stories. So when a German pilot named Manfred von Richthofen began accumulating victory after victory in a bright red airplane, the newspapers quickly realized they had something valuable. He was a character the public could follow. A mysterious ace in a crimson aircraft flying above the trenches and defeating opponent after opponent in dramatic aerial duels. The story kind of wrote itself. Each confirmed victory increased his legend, and each newspaper headline helped turn von Richthofen into something far larger than a single fighter pilot. Governments quickly understood the value of that attention. For Germany, the Red Baron became a symbol of skill and discipline and technological superiority in the air. His victories were celebrated and his image was circulated. The narrative of the fearless ace helped sustain morale at a time when the war on the ground had become exhausting and uncertain. Without intending to, the newspapers and the military together had created something powerful. They had turned a pilot into a brand.
The new Wegovy pill is now available through Weight Watchers. Powerful GLP-1 results in a simple pill at the lowest price available. And with Weight Watchers, you can get doctor support and personalized nutrition programs. See if you qualify at weightwatchers.com. Ad not reviewed or approved by Novo Nordisk.
My name is Teresa Barber. I was in the United States Navy, and I served overseas in the Middle East and Africa. Early on in my career, I had a commander that taught our suicide prevention training, and the very next day, he took his own life. 90% of suicide attempts involving a gun are fatal. My way of continuing my service is to help protect my community by being a responsible gun owner and by storing firearms safely. Store all your guns securely. Help stop suicide.
Brought to you by End Family Fire and the Ad Council.
On April 21st, 1918, the legend collided with reality. During a dogfight over the Somme River in northern France, von Richthofen chased a Canadian pilot at low altitude across Allied lines. In the chaos of the pursuit, ground fire and enemy aircraft filled the sky around him, and the bright red airplane that had become famous across Europe suddenly began to descend. The plane landed roughly in a field near the front. Inside the cockpit, Manfred von Richthofen was dead. News of the death spread quickly across both sides of the war. Allied pilots, many of whom had spent months studying his tactics and fearing the appearance of that red aircraft, treated the moment with an unusual level of respect. He was buried with military honors by the very enemies who had spent years trying to defeat him. But even after his death, the legend continued to grow. The newspapers that had helped build the myth of the Red Baron kept telling the story. His victory count, his distinctive airplane, and the image of the solitary ace fighting high above the trenches became part of the larger cultural memory of the war. Over the decades that followed, that legend traveled far beyond the battlefield. Writers, filmmakers, advertisers, and cartoonists all borrowed the story in different ways. A German fighter pilot from the First World War eventually appeared in comic strips, in children's cartoons, and even on the boxes of frozen pizza brands decades later. The business lesson hidden inside that story is actually surprisingly modern. Long before television or social media or viral marketing campaigns, governments and newspapers had already discovered the power of a compelling narrative. A single, recognizable character could carry an entire story. They could shape public perception, and they could keep people emotionally connected to events happening thousands of miles away. In other words, the Red Baron proved something that media companies and advertisers and political strategists still understand today. A powerful story can become an asset all by itself. And that transformation began with the rise and the final flight of the most famous fighter pilot of the First World War, the Red Baron, on April 21st, 1918. I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the podcast that finds the turning points behind the headlines. To hear more stories like this, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. And if you're enjoying the stories, please don't forget to subscribe and leave a quick review. It helps more people find the story behind the business. And if you want to actually understand business without the fluff or the buzzwords or the MBA language, start by visiting businessdailypodcast.com.
Mom, can you tell me a story?
Sure. Once upon a time, a mom needed a new car.
Was she brave?
She was tired, mostly. But she went to Carvana.com and found a great car at a great price. No secret treasure map required.
Did you have to fight a dragon?
Nope. She bought it 100% online. From her bed, actually.
Was it scary?
Honey, it was as unscary as car buying could be.
Did the car have a sunroof?
It did, actually.
Okay, good story.
Car buying you'll want to tell stories about. Buy your car today on
Carvana.
Delivery fees may apply.